Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm back with another video. It is July 21st, 2026. And what I'd like to talk about today is how the narrative that we are fed from year to year and even from generation to generation is based on misconceptions that are passed down even by well-meaning experts. So one of the ways that I have educated myself to break free of the mainstream narrative, which after the Vietnam War lies and the Afghan War lies and the two Iraq War lies, the endless wars that the United States continually talks the American people into to get them to go along with these wars. Um, you can debunk them by digging into or going underneath the mainstream narrative. And oftentimes now, what we're seeing, which is a helpful development, is that you have people from the intelligence community or from the diplomatic community. These are people who worked for in the belly of the beast, so to speak, and had a kind of a come to truth moment, and they're speaking truth about the current situation, or at least they're making a sincere attempt to do that. But the problem is that many of them still have residual misconceptions about the nature of the beast that they come out of. And one of those misconceptions is the idea that NATO was created as a defensive alliance. I recently was listening to a podcast, and one of this quite esteemed ambassador, and I don't want to mention names because I don't want to this is not about personalities. This is about just looking at truth, looking at the issues as they stand. So I was listening to this one particular podcast, and the man had a lot of good things to say, but he also dropped in the idea that NATO was founded as a defensive alliance against the aggressive Soviet Union. So the question that I ask here is, was NATO set up as a defensive alliance and only changed to be offensive after the fall of the Soviet Union? So the idea is that the Soviet Union was the evil empire, basically, and NATO was set up to protect the free world from the evil Soviet Union. And after the Soviet Union ended, the defensive nature of NATO changed towards offensive, and they've been involved. So NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, has been involved in Iraq. Now, I think Iraq is not in the North Atlantic, nor is Colombia, which they have a presence in, nor is any place in Asia, which NATO talks about expanding to in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So what is this business about NATO, and what was its true intentions? That's the question. So I will go through some of the issues here. What follows is a series of video history lessons. I'm reading off of my notes here, so forgive me if I go back and forth between the microphone and my notes. So what follows is a series of video history lessons. This is in my Substack article. To bring you up to speed on the forgotten but crucial history. I consider these videos to be must-watch. They give context to the lead-up to the anti-colonial and anti-capitalist strand of U.S. politics, which has been suppressed from the very beginning of the United States. And so I consider myself part of the anti-capitalist and anti-colonial, anti-imperialist faction, I guess you could say, or strand of the American people. How many of us really want these wars? How many of us want Wall Street bankers to to call the shots, and the fact that the Princeton study said that the American people have a 1% effect on policy. So if you agree with me on that point, then follow along here, because you'll be able to understand why, if you're listening to this and you think that NATO is just defending itself and always has been, and that Russia has always been an evil empire and it's always been bad. Please follow along with me. So here's what President Roosevelt thought of Stalin, and we all know, Stalin is just demonized endlessly for his presumed crimes, even though after he died, there was a massive, he had a funeral that was almost as passionate as the one we saw in Iran recently. But here's what Roosevelt thought of Stalin and the Soviet Union, and please get ready to have your socks knocked off. So he says, I may say, you're not going to believe this, I may say that I got along fine with Marshal Stalin. He is a man who combines a tremendous, relentless determination with a stalwart good humor. I believe he is truly representative of the heart and soul of Russia. And I believe that we are going to get along with him and the Russian people very well indeed. So if you think Russia is bad, then you are contradicting what President Roosevelt, who met Stalin at least twice and had numerous, interactions with him, believed. He met him personally. And of course, the people who run the United States behind the scenes and got rid of Roosevelt don't want you to think that. That is the reason why Roosevelt was gotten rid of. I'll talk about that. But there's another piece of this. This is a quote. This is from a documentary, actually, that comes off of RT, the Russian propaganda channel, otherwise known as, it's like the Russian BBC, so to speak. But these are just factual, this is facts. And if you don't want to believe this, here's what Stalin said. This is an actual letter. It's included here in the text of the Substack article. And it says, in the name of the people of the United States of America, I present this scroll to the city of Stalingrad. Stalingrad is now Volgograd, but it was called Stalingrad then. To commemorate our admiration for the gallant defenders whose courage, fortitude, and devotion during the siege of September 13th, 1942 to January 31st, 1943 will inspire forever the hearts of all free people. That's you and me. Their glorious victory stemmed the tide of invasion and marked the turning point in the war of the Allied nations against the forces of aggression. So here's the letter. This is written with Stalin, with Roosevelt's signature, saying that he appreciated the contribution that the Soviet Union, the Soviet people in Stalingrad, what they did to defeat the Nazis in World War II. We were on the same side. We were allies. So, and Roosevelt himself said he felt that we could get along with Russia. So what happened? I'll explain. Roosevelt and Stalin sided against Churchill, Winston Churchill, who was determined to maintain the British Empire. We should back up a little bit and find out who this guy Churchill was. He was responsible for what's called the Boer War in South Africa, and he was he had an extremely racist opinion of Indians. He instituted a famine in Bengal in 1943, which resulted in the deaths of probably 3 million starved to death Indians. And yet he's regarded as a great hero. And he has a history that people really don't know about. He invaded the Soviet Union after the revolution. Why is it not okay? Why is it okay for the West to meddle in other countries' affairs? to the extent of even invading them. Can't we just leave other countries alone? That's the question I'm asking here. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt had chosen as his running mate Henry Wallace, who distinguished himself with his Century of the Common Man speech, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt's For Freedom speech. I've included these speeches, two speeches. They're on YouTube. They're readily available, and you can see for yourself what Henry Wallace wanted for you and me and the people of the United States, and what Franklin Delano Roosevelt wanted for the whole world. The fact is that the captains of industry, the bankers, the military-industrial complex, such as it had been, had to get rid of Wallace and Roosevelt. They tried in 1934 with the business plot, but failed failed due to the Marine Corps hero Smedley Butler, who understood that war is a racket, always was when he wrote that book in 1934, still is now. However, and I have videos that talk about Smedley Butler and what kind of a person he was. You hardly ever hear about him because they don't want you to know about him. He was a true hero. He actually saved the American Republic from these corporate fascists who are actually running things behind the scenes. In any case, these captains of industry, the heads of the bankers and these people who were they were basically also running the Democratic Party, still are. They were successful on the second try when they deposed Henry Wallace in favor of the ignorant and pliable Harry Truman. Wallace had a 60% approval rating with the American people, and they really wanted him to be the vice president to succeed Roosevelt. But as the video shows, there was basically a coup against Henry Wallace, and they installed Harry Truman. And Harry Truman was directly responsible for initiating the Cold War. So as I mentioned here, this outstanding history lesson by Peter Kuznick shows how the Cold War would have been averted if the fascist elements plaguing U.S. society since the time of the slaveholders and Wall Street sympathizers had not been able to defy the people's will. So here's some case examples of this. Much of the ruling classes of England and the U.S. were Nazi sympathizers before World War II, and I have links here. So Prescott Bush, the father of George H.W. Bush and grandfather of George W. Bush, as head of the Union Banking Corporation, this is Prescott Bush, financed the Nazis and had business interests with Nazi concentration camps. And I also cite the role of big business in the Holocaust. In the recent book, IBM and the Holocaust, written in 2001, Edwin Black reports how the well-known computer giant worked with the Nazi regime. The IBM punch cards allowed the comprehensive census taking that identified Jews who would be persecuted and murdered. During the war, Ford and General Motors also used slave labor when manufacturing military vehicles in Köln for the German army. And of course, if you own stock in any of those companies, you are benefiting from these Nazi ties. Now, also, we have the case of the British royal family. Here was the King George's brother, who was King Edward VIII, who became the Duke of Windsor after abdicating in 1936. He said, this is Edward said, "I never thought Hitler was such a bad chap." And Edward made this remark in 1970 when it was widely known that Hitler and the Nazis had directly and indirectly killed more than 40 million civilians and soldiers. So here's this British head in royalty saying Hitler was not such a bad guy. Who are these people that we're in this special relationship with. The Nazis planned to install the Duke, this is Edward VIII, as leader after a successful conquest of Britain. The former head of British naval intelligence said Hitler would soon be in this country, but that there was no reason to worry about it because he would bring the Duke of Windsor back over as king. These are our enemies, you know. So you've got the British royalty, you know, working hand in glove with Hitler. Now, Churchill was the ultimate double dealer. After the Battle of Stalingrad, probably the biggest, bloodiest battle in human history, during the talks at the Tehran Conference of November 29, 1943, Winston Churchill stated, that Stalingrad became a symbol of courage of the Russian people and together with the symbol of the greatest human suffering. This symbol will remain for centuries. It is necessary that future generations could see and feel all the greatness of the Volga, won the victory and all the horrors of the raging war of extermination there. So Churchill sounds like a pretty good guy, doesn't he? He's praising the Soviet Union during that time. Well, the reason why he's praising them is because he saved his ass from a German invasion of England. Yet, following the victory over the Nazis, which came at a cost of over 20 million, people say 27 million Soviet people, versus England's 500,000, Churchill was plotting Operation Unthinkable, a new invasion of the Soviet Union using former Wehrmacht, that is, former Nazi Germany soldiers. He said very early in the game, Stalin got wind of what Churchill was up to. And Stalin told his chief commander, General Zhukov, that man is capable of anything. Hi, Soviet Union, stab you in the back. That's Churchill. One of his spies in London, that is one of Stalin's spies in London, fortunately they had some people like that, had passed on British plans for meddling in post-war Germany. Together with Truman's nuclear-fueled cockiness, Operation Unthinkable created suspicion and bitterness among the former Allies. Operation Unthinkable was thus a catalyst for the Cold War. This is a quote from the book, and you can follow the link. Now, from 1945 to 1949, the U.S. and UK planned to bomb Russia into the Stone Age. So was the U.S. Cold War military doctrine really defensive? And who actually started the nuclear arms race? The U.S. mainly focused not on deterrence, but on offensive, preemptive strike. There was unanimity in insider circles that the United States ought to plan to win a nuclear war. The logic that to do so implied to strike first was inescapable, he emphasized, adding that first strike plans were even represented in the official nuclear policy of the United States. This comes from a link from 1945 to 49. The U.S. and U.K. planned to bomb Russia into the Stone Age. And I'll add that today's U.S. nuclear doctrine says that it reserves the right to a first strike against any country that it feels is a threat to the United States, you know, including even Iran at this point, which is, 7,000 miles away from the United States. So the question is, after NATO was formed as a defensive alliance, the Soviet Union, this was in 1949, NATO was formed, the Soviet Union was talking about joining in the interests of collective security. And in 1954, the foreign minister Molotov made a formal proposal. This point came up in this interesting discussion. So the United States and England and the NATO countries say, oh, we're just creating NATO as a defensive alliance. Well, Why is it then, and I haven't included this, but I'll mention it, why is it that Germany, which was supposed to be neutral and demilitarized, suddenly became a separate country, West Germany, and suddenly finds itself in NATO, and suddenly we find former Wehrmacht officers who should have been in jail for life for war crimes are now having high positions in NATO. And yet NATO claims to be a defensive alliance. What is going on here? A further question. Is it okay for the United States to have a Monroe Doctrine to keep other countries outside the U.S. sphere of influence in Latin America? But it's not okay for Russia, having been invaded through Eastern Europe in World War I, the Russian Civil War after World War I, Napoleon in 1812, Crimean War of 1853 to 56, and the catastrophic losses of World War II for wanting friendly countries on its borders. So we say Russia's being aggressive because when we are directly threatening them, as we are now in Ukraine, using Ukraine as a proxy, fighting Russia to the last Ukrainian, as Lindsey Graham famously said. What is that about? How can we possibly accuse Russia of being offensive when we're the one who are placing all the NATO, bases on its borders? And from the very beginning, they were threatening the Soviet Union, from the very beginning, right after World War II. So, my conclusion. It is a given in the national religion of American exceptionalism that we've all been raised on, that our country is made up of noble and honest civil servants who work for the good of the American people. The fact that the USA has been at war for 90% of its existence should give us some tip-off that the people who actually run the United States had no intention of maintaining world peace following World War II. Plans to attack and destroy Russia started right after World War II. The same can be said after the US-backed regime of Chiang Kai-shek was kicked out of China by the communists. You can see, if you're Chinese, you don't have any right to determine who your government is going to be. We decide who's going to rule you. Is it any surprise that with the US economy serving the super rich while most Americans struggle, that Trump is waging war against Russia using Ukraine as a proxy, and waging war against Iran using Israel and the Gulf monarchies as proxies, and using Taiwan as a proxy to undermine China? NATO was never a defensive alliance. It only provided that as a fig leaf. We're only being defensive while we prepare to stab you in the back and drop nuclear weapons on you. That is the defensive nature of NATO. And yet you have, otherwise highly qualified experts and former diplomats and people of that nature saying that NATO was a defensive alliance, because you see the indoctrination that is so deep within Western elites, it trickles down inexorably to you and me through the mass media and even in alt media. That's how deep this problem goes. And so we really need to root that out and really get our history straight. So that's the purpose that I've made this video, and I've included the documentation to prove that this is the reality. NATO was not a defensive alliance. It never was. Russia actually asked to join NATO. They were refused. Putin asked to join NATO. He was refused. Molotov asked. He was refused. And that does not indicate the desire for collective security. It determines the ultimate goal, which is domination of the West over the rest of the world. That's what is going on. So thanks again for listening, and I hope you'll take some time to watch some of the videos that I've included in this below my video, because it will give you some really important background into what has actually been going on in history. We have to bring back historical memory to understand the reason why we're in this quite precarious situation worldwide it didn't just pop out of nowhere. There is historical causes for it. So thanks again for listening. Please support my channel by either making a contribution through Substack or through Buy Me a Coffee, or buying one of my information billboard t-shirts, which do not promote me, but promote the ideas of peace and consciousness and understanding of what is, we need to cultivate a better understanding of how our world actually works. So again, thanks for listening, and I will talk to you again soon.